Many people in our culture make an assumption that hospital is safe and home is dangerous for giving birth. We're not really going to consider that today, but there is much research which shows that actually home is the safest option and hospital is wonderful if you have a particular condition which needs extra medical support. However, there's also another way of looking at it. If you're not quite sure what you want to do, book a home birth simply as an exercise in keeping your options open, because you're making this choice possibly when you're 2 or 3 months pregnant and you have no idea what you're going to feel like when you're 40 weeks pregnant or actually in labour. So it is a very good idea to keep your options open. In the first place, if you book a home birth, it is very, very easy at any time to swap to a hospital birth or birth centre birth. All you do is pick up the phone and say, I've changed my mind, I want to give birth in hospital. Nobody will bat an eyelid, it's an easy phone call. But if towards the end of your pregnancy, or even when you're in labour sometimes, and it can frequently happen in labour actually, you think, oh, I wish I hadn't got to go to hospital, I'd so much rather stay at home, really comfortable and feel good here. At that point, to pick up a phone and say, I've decided not to come in, I'm going to have a home birth, is likely to be a difficult conversation. It's also likely to be a difficult conversation that your poor unfortunate partner is going to have on your behalf. So just think about that too, because at that point you're perfectly legally entitled to change your mind, but to lay on a home birth midwife to bring equipment round is a more complicated procedure and one which is harder to achieve. So if you've booked your home birth in the first place, you've kept your options open. The other thing about booking a home birth is that when you go into labour, the midwife will come to you to confirm that you are in labour and it's time to get to going, the midwife to come to you. At that point, you can perfectly easily say, oh, I think I've changed my mind, I'd rather go into hospital. Fine, no problem. But if you haven't booked a home birth, you then have to go, get in the car, travel across the city or the country, go to the hospital, bright lights, noises, sirens, wait in triage in order to be assessed whether you're in labour. And it's pretty usual after all that hassle and trouble that labour has slowed down and you're sent home. So having that assessment made at home from a midwife you know is a great big advantage. So do consider it. So there are 2 reasons, just from the point of view of keeping your options open, why it could be a good idea to book a home birth. One is that it's easy to swap into hospital, and it's not easy to swap from hospital to home. 2 is that the midwife comes to you to assess if you're in labour, and you don't have to go somewhere else and meet a stranger to assess if you're in labour. Now, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about a group of midwives. Sadly, they don't practice anymore, but they were wonderful midwives. They were called the Albanys. And they were a group of 6 midwives who functioned a little bit differently to most other midwives. And they had a contract with the NHS to care for the women in an area of southeast London, which was really quite a poor area, quite a deprived area. It certainly wasn't wealthy women. They did things a little bit differently. They didn't have a due date, and the women didn't have to decide where they were going to give birth. And they had a known midwife. They had a midwife who they could call. It's called case loading. So when they went into labour, they called their midwife, who they knew, and she would assess the situation, and if she felt there was a good reason for them to go into hospital, if they had any sense, they did. If they wanted to go into hospital, they did. If they felt in the reality of being in labour that they would actually much prefer to stay at home, they did. And as a result of that, they had an over 50% home birth rate, and they had a much higher safety record than the surrounding areas, and they were themselves in a deprived area. I will also tell you about a mum who I taught. She had booked to go into the birth centre to give birth. When she went into labour, her instinct was so powerful to stay at home in her safe place that she refused to get into the car. They weren't set up for a home birth, and the only way her husband could get her into the car was to travel in the back seat with her and get a neighbour to drive. So that was okay. But when they had their second baby, they decided they weren't going to go through this trauma again, and they booked a home birth. Nice birthing pool already in the kitchen, and do you know, she went one better. She refused to come downstairs anywhere near all those other people in the road, all that hassle and bustle. Her safe place was her bedroom, and that was where she gave birth. It's just tiny examples of how powerful instinct is. I will just give you one more example. This was a consultant obstetrician who became pregnant with her first baby in her 40s. Now, remember that obstetricians see all the emergencies, all the things that could possibly go wrong, and most of their professional life is spent dealing with emergencies. So, because of her experience, because of her knowledge, her brain told her that the only thing to do if you gave birth as an older mother was to go into hospital, not just the birth centre, but the hospital, because then you've got all that medical stuff there in case you need it. However, this mum, she had not a terribly good pregnancy. She was quite sick, not just pregnancy sickness, but various other problems. So she spent a lot of time at home. And of course, as those of you who've had babies, or those of you who are partners of people who've had babies will know, hormones become very powerful during pregnancy. And her hormones started to take over. And she began to think, I just feel good at home. I want to have my baby at home. And her brain said, don't be ridiculous. At your age, with all your knowledge, that's crazy. But hormones won, and she decided she would have a home birth. All her colleagues, all her obstetric colleagues in the hospital also said, you must be mad. You know perfectly well you would never advise another woman to give birth at home when they're in their 40s having their first babies. But that's what she did. She had a wonderful home birth, and then she wrote a book about it, which is an interesting book. It's called The Heart in the Womb, and it just shows us the reality of birth rather than theory of birth, which is interesting and it's powerful. Thank you for watching the video. I hope it was useful. Hope you enjoyed it. It will be really important to us if you would subscribe to our channel. Click the link to subscribe and then you'll get all our most up-to-date information. It makes a difference to us and we're really grateful. Thank you.